I'm finally getting back on YouTube. And one of my first videos, I do want to talk about something that's very important to me, something that I went through personally that I feel is not necessarily widely discussed, but I do feel that more and more people are beginning to talk about it, and that is something called metabolic damage. So metabolic damage happens to a lot of fitness competitors, figure competitors, anyone kind of in the bodybuilding world, but it's not necessarily limited to that population. I would say that people who go through extreme dieting or any kind of extreme program in regards to weight loss, body fat loss, things like that, can exhibit some of these symptoms or can experience what we call metabolic damage. Okay, so metabolic damage can be described as a series of both metabolic, hormonal, and behavioral related issues that come about with damaging certain elements of your metabolism. So in general, those who are experiencing metabolic damage are in these prolonged periods of stress. And as a result, their metabolism begins to compensate. This compensation creates hunger, energy changes, and cravings, as well as a metabolic slowdown led by a decline in thyroid hormone. This is mentioned by Jade, Teta. Your body is no longer working with you. Essentially, it's in the fight or flight mode, meaning its primary purpose is to keep you alive. It is a physiological reaction that occurs in response to perceived harmful events, attacks, or the threat to survival. And this is referred to by Walter Bradford Cannon. So what does metabolic damage feel like? From my personal experience, one thing that I can remember is just feeling exhausted all the time. So I would go to sleep and I would probably sleep anywhere from 10 to 14 hours and I would wake up so tired. My body hurt. Emotionally, I was tired. Physically, I was tired. And that low energy level carried on throughout the entire day. I never reached a point where you kind of wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, good, okay, I feel awake now. I never experienced that. I had this very low mood all the time. I was probably less patient. I was definitely not as happy, not as energetic, not as positive. So it definitely affected my mood. With it affecting my mood, it also affected my motivation. So I had a far less motivation to do anything, not necessarily just work out, but to do anything, to hang out with friends, to walk into the grocery store. I mean, I remember parking. I would want to park so close so that I could spend as little steps getting into the grocery store. Everything was just hard. I mean, everything required energy, and that's something that my body just didn't want to give me at that point. I would eat relatively clean when I had the willpower to, and would just gain weight. So with metabolic damage, your body, again, is all it's trying to do is keep you alive. And so at that point, even though I was eating relatively clean, I would just gain weight. And, I joke about this now, but I swear, I mean, I would smell a donut or a cookie or a piece of cake, and then I would put on like 5 pounds. And, it was just a very different place that I've ever been in before, and really, really, really overwhelming. I was at my heaviest, and just to let you know, I'm about 5'4", and before I started competing, I was probably about 148, and then I got all the way down to about 112 by the time I stepped on stage, and then within a span of, I think it was less than 6 months, I managed to gain about 65 pounds. I was at a loss for what to do. All I remember is journaling and writing about how bad I felt physically, emotionally, and I just didn't know what to do. I came across a YouTube video by Danny J, who actually I am currently working with right now. I'm in her metabolic program right now. I came across her YouTube video, and all I remember is seeing it and taking a huge breath and thinking, thank God, this is something that happens to women, or this is something that happens to competitors. Like, this is normal in a sense, and I'm not alone. And so, my purpose for doing a lot of these videos is to, again, talk more openly about the dangers of competing or the dangers of being on an extreme diet, being on an extreme workout program, and just shedding light on something that, like I mentioned, is not necessarily widely discussed, and just to further educate people that there are dangers in regards to competing. It's very glamorous. I mean, you can see pictures on Instagram, Facebook, any kind of social media platform, and it looks like, of course I want to do that. I want to be, ripped, and I want to get my hair done and my makeup done and step on stage and maybe win a trophy. And it was just, that's the attractive side of competing, is that day of competing. What's less talked about is prep, and what's even further less talked about is post-show. So honestly, in my opinion, prep in comparison to post-competition was easy. And anyone who's been through prep, it's hard. It is hard to get up and do fasted cardio. It is hard to eat out of Tupperware, to bring your Tupperware out to dinner with friends. It's hard to be at a dining room table and not being able to enjoy the food but smell it. It's hard to work out when you are exhausted, when you are functioning off of maybe 80 grams of carbohydrates. It is hard. So comparing what prep is like to what I experienced post-show, it's hard post-show. It is hard. And again, I am here to just share my story as well as give you hope. So if you are watching this and you have experienced something along the lines of extreme fatigue, extreme dieting, maybe you lost your menstrual cycle, maybe you're gaining weight without even knowing what's going on, and you're eating clean and you're doing everything right, there may be something more serious that's happening with your metabolism. But I promise you that it gets better. It gets better. It takes time. And, like I mentioned, I was able to gain, and I'm saying able to gain because, the neural side of it is my body functions phenomenally. I mean, it was trying to keep me alive, so it helped me put on 65 pounds to keep me alive. It took me a while to get back down to my normal weight. Because my body was essentially fighting to keep me alive, it did not want to lose the weight that I had gained. It did not want to drop any body fat. It wanted to just keep me alive. And that goes back to what I had mentioned earlier about the fight or flight response. So, that is why it took me 3.5 years to finally feel more or less recovered. When my body finally started to feel safe, I was able to slowly, and I emphasize slowly, start working out again. I still didn't add in any cardio. Until this day, I actually don't do any slow, steady cardio. So, in general, my energy improved, my mood elevated, but most importantly, I started to feel like myself again. So with the metabolic damage, I also developed a binge eating habit. And I think that's something that's pretty common with competitors. I mean, you spend so long in prep, whether it's 12, 16, 21, or in my case, 6 months of being in such a caloric deficit that, your body naturally just craves food. It craves carbohydrates and fat and sugar. And, after you compete, you usually have this treat meal where you go all out and you eat until you're so extremely full. But the dangerous part about that is that you start to repeat that habit. So, you spend the next week cleaning it up, but by the time you reach the weekend, your willpower is shot and you're exhausted, and all you want to do is do that again. You want to go out and you want to have pizza and ice cream and donuts and whatever it is. And, it's a vicious cycle that continues to repeat. And I was an example of that. I would try to go back on my diet and I would try to restrict my calories. But, whether or not I made it through that morning or that day or that week, which was unlikely, I would end up binging. And it was interesting to look back and see what I would binge on. It was always carbohydrates, and it was always really high fat things. So, those two macros were what my body was telling me, you need more of these because you spent almost an entire year, deprived of these two macros. And, the fat is so important for, especially females, for hormone regulation. And, my first, coach that I had, I actually had no fat in my diet. And I'll go into what my prep was like in other videos. But, I spent a majority of my prep actually having no fat, other than that is what metabolic damage felt like. I was tired all the time, extreme fatigue, really low mood, low motivation, if any. Um, Working out was hard. I no longer had the endorphin release, and that's just because all my hormones were just all over the place. Um, Lack of motivation, became more introverted. I became depressed. I developed a binge eating habit. So all of those things, personally for me, that's what I experienced. I know that, there's other things that other women have experienced. Um, and through all of that, I was very hopeless. I didn't know if I was ever going to enjoy working out again, if I was ever going to compete again, if I was ever going to be able to lose the weight again or feel good about myself. So I was at a loss for what to do. And, my hopes for sharing my story, as well as sharing and shedding some light on the dangers of being on any kind of extreme program, is that number one, you're more educated and more prepared of what to expect potentially if you compete, or potentially if you're put on a program that's more on the extreme side. But also, more importantly, is to give those of you who are struggling right now hope. I know what it's like. I've talked to a few girls coming off of shows, and I can just literally put myself in their shoes when they start describing the difficulties that they're going through. And all I can say is that it gets better. It really does. It takes time. And as we all know, we would much rather be better yesterday or tomorrow or in an hour. But unfortunately, because of the damage that you do internally, it takes some time for your body to readjust, to find balance. But there's hope, and I promise you that there's hope. And again, my purpose is to give you hope, as well as educate you a little bit more about, the dangers of doing a show, the dangers of competing, or the dangers of, again, being on an extreme program. So thank you for watching. I hope to, continue to be more proactive on YouTube, be more proactive on my Instagram about sharing, certain stories, certain mindset exercises that you can do that will help get you better from the inside out. I will put down some links below that can, further educate you about the dangers of any kind of metabolic issue that you may be experiencing. But again, thank you for watching, and I just want to remind you that it will get better. Okay, thank you, and I will talk to you soon. Bye. So this is me at my leanest, like I mentioned, roughly about 9% body fat. This is me at my heaviest at about 173, and this is more of my current figure at about 135. Again, thank you for watching, and just remember that your current situation is not your final destination and that things will get better.